All right, so we're back. This is mini lecture number 2 out of Learning Block 1. This is on the supply chain framework. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about how the supply chain has extended beyond just an interorganizational process. We spoke about this last time. It's cross-functional. It's cross-firm. It's very important. These are the key words. Collaborative is a very key word. It's relationship management. We'll talk a lot about supplier relationship management when we get to procurement. And these are the kinds of things that we're trying to coordinate through: customer service, demand, order fulfillment, manufacturing flow, product development, returns. All of these areas and all the others, warehousing and so forth and so on, are all part of what we're going to look at when we talk about the framework for success. So we're also talking about doing it in this kind of an environment. So you have suppliers everywhere, you have customers everywhere, you have to transport everywhere, and you have retail and wholesale channels all over the world. And the goal of supply chain is to manage every relationship that's in here, have visibility on what's taking place on a routine way, in a very secure way, and structuring visibility so that the company can make the very best decisions in these areas. It's a big job. In this world, we're talking about, when you think about all that, we're talking about something called the extended supply chain. So this is the internal supply chain right here. This is the supply chain that is more or less semi-structured data. This is basically structured data. This is semi-structured data. Here you might have a third-party logistics provider that's providing data back into your system like this. But the reality of it is, folks, is that research tells us that 80% of the company's data is out here in an unstructured way. So this can be purchase orders going to your contract manufacturers and them sending a purchase order to their contract manufacturer or their tier 2, and on and on and on. All that is out here in Neverland, and the goal of supply chain is to bring this all in. So this is the target, is to have collaboration, have linkages wherever possible within the supply chain, understand what the network looks like, understand and prioritize the criticality of each point in that network, and manage it appropriately. If you're buying pens and pencils, it's not the same level of criticality as some kind of assembly that goes into a proprietary item that you may be making. So it requires a lot of work from everyone in the supply chain, from procurement on down, in order to pull this off. And all of this has some amount of input into the demand plan, which you're going to see is probably the most critical function of all, and less understood function of all, as to why it's even critical. So what we're seeing now is less focus. We're seeing less focus on cutting costs. It's not that we're not looking to cut costs, but we're looking to cut costs and at the same time enable processes. If we can do that at a lower cost and improve our effectiveness and our efficiency, then that's a good move. But we're trying to get more connected, and we're trying to build more relationships that are win-win, and not just churn our supplier base, because our supplier base has a lot that we can learn from. They can help us get better, we can help them get better, but you have to do it in an environment where there's openness and transparency as well as security. And by so doing, you are then contributing, you are helping yourself in reducing risk. Because anytime you introduce a new partner or a new point into the supply chain, you actually introduce more risk, because you don't know how well they're managing their network or their systems or their data retention or document retention. So this is critical, that in addition to just getting the best price, you also are getting a relationship that protects your company from risk. So we've been doing this a long time, and I think this is still a valid comment. We moved away from, talking of course from a US perspective, we moved away from Made in America a long time ago. Well, a long time ago. 15 years ago or so. It started to migrate a lot more. But companies are now see the world as a place where they can make their products anywhere. They can make them through, and then they connect them through global supply chains. And once they connect them, then they can literally sell them anywhere. So that's the goal of that little graphic right there. And so the global supply chain really facilitates that. So that's why it's so important that we have visibility up and down the supply chain in terms of where processes are, where orders are, where inventory is, where ships are, and it's all a matter of integration. And integration, of course, is as much a technology activity as anything we do. I mean, the reason we can do this is because of IT, because we now have tools and toolkits and systems that we can use to link all this up for data. And then we now have tools that are able to take that data, particularly if they're in one database or an ERP database, that then can take that data and then manipulate that data into a strategic forecast. I'm not sure what happened here. There we go. All right, so what's coming up is this. When we look at the future of supply chain, I think no one's going to argue that we're seeing more and more localization of this. When you deal in a global environment, you have to execute locally. And as companies become more and more extended, they'll have localized supply chain management. And quite honestly, the further you are from headquarters, the more productive you are, because it's up to you sitting out here to lead that charge. You're not going to be able to ask for permission 100% of the time. You need to know what you need to do, and you need to do it. And that is what a lot of these companies, major companies, are looking for, is someone that's going to own it and is going to lead it. And yes, you keep everybody informed, and yes, you're going to make mistakes, but in essence, this is what it's all about. You have an obligation to lead, and you need to do that. We're going to do some management from centralized hubs, but that management from centralized hubs is going to be information driven and driven by process standardization. The key to linkage and collaboration is process standardization. So there's tactics that we'll talk about here about how you can do that without the company having to do that. And that's the use of third-party services, whether it's a third-party logistics company, whether it's a cloud-based solution that can standardize your data or harmonize your data and give you the data back into your system the way you want to see it, already validated. Whatever that is, this is the way of the future right here. The other thing we're seeing, and we will talk about this, as I mentioned, in manufacturing, we're seeing a change from a low-cost country model. That is, we went to the low-cost country because it has lower labor rates, to something more than that, and we're starting to challenge this whole model to begin with. Low-cost country driven around low-cost labor doesn't necessarily mean the lowest landed cost. And as we've been into this, as not just the U.S., but every developed country has gotten into this more, there has been a growing better understanding of what we call total cost of ownership. And we will speak about total cost of ownership as well. So we're seeing this coming back. We're seeing it come back to maybe a more regional model, and that's partly because the cost of transportation has gone down dramatically. And as the cost of transportation has gone down, then you can afford to pay a little more in freight and bring your manufacturing a little bit closer, perhaps, if that makes sense. The other thing you're seeing is the growth of markets in what were previously considered to be low-cost countries. So China, for example, has a massive domestic market where it didn't have that market 15 years ago, 20 years ago. There was not a middle-class domestic market. Now there is. And so if you had plants, I can tell you as a fact, if you have plants in China that are making goods for export, they're probably going to be making goods for domestic consumption. And that is not too far away and has already happened for some companies that I'm already aware of. So you're not going to see those goods come back and have them re-exported out of the US or Canada or Germany. You're going to have a plant in China, and the same is true in India. India is a little bit held back by its own rules and regulations, its legal structure, but it is changing. And when it changes, you're looking at potentially billions of people in a middle class, and that is going to turn everything upside down for sure. Suppliers will be less centralized. You're going to see more and more local suppliers, but the procurement function will be centralized. So because it's very information driven. So procurement will shift from just beating people up on price to strategic supplier relationships in order to reduce supply chain risk, and well as to accomplish the collaboration. There'll always be leverage on price over volume. That will never change, should never change. But there are other factors that are coming into play now as companies are becoming more and more aware of the cost of just churning suppliers right and left. So supply chain leaders for tomorrow, they have to be business people. They have to be qualitative. They have to also be quantitative in the sense they have to be able to put together a business case and present this to their colleagues in the senior management suite. And so your visibility in this business is intuitively higher than it ever has been. The other thing is that the new boss in town probably came out of this generation here called Generation X. And Generation X is something very different than the baby boomers. The Generation X guy has been using PCs, is very comfortable with PCs. He's tech savvy, he or she. They are tech savvy. They understand products a lot better than the boomers did, the role of products and the importance of making them relevant in the marketplace, in a very fast-moving marketplace. IoT stands for the Internet of Things. We may or may not talk a little bit about that down the road, but I mean, this is a huge area right now. They're risk takers. They've just grown up differently. Their reaction time is a lot different. They're much more nimble, and they're focused on getting people. They want to retain people, and they embrace, call it gender diversity, call it diversity in general. It's more about business culture than it is, are you going to stay here 20 years? They know you're not. In many cases, they don't want you to, because if you stay here 20 years, then no one new is coming in behind you or coming in to replace you. And so this is more your career path than it was for me, where people moving in and moving out is a good thing. And then there's also this work-life thing. So the new bosses understand that, and they know exactly what it takes to make that kind of a culture available to you. And it's a much flatter organizational structure. We've eliminated a lot of people who just who write purchase orders. We don't have people like that anymore generally. They do 18 other things, or the system writes a purchase order. So this is a very different CFO you have now, or president, and likewise you have a very different chief financial officer. So the financial officer now, and I can tell you this having reported to financial officers for many years, they have moved from the idea of supply chain being a cost center to one of being a vehicle of profitability. They understand that everything that happens in logistics is tied back to the P&L. Virtually everything in supply chain is tied back to the P&L. I mean, if you take the supply chain, so you take the cost of materials and you take the cost of logistics, you're looking at probably 60 to 70% of the P&L of company costs are tied up in that. And the decisions that are made in supply chain, if they're made truly in a supply chain process, if you will, drive probably more closer to 80% of that. So it is a huge process with a huge impact on finance. And the new CFOs understand that. One reason is because the universities are teaching finance and supply chain, and that alignment, and they never used to do that. Now we're looking to have a program like that next year. which I don't know if I'll teach it, but maybe a team teaching thing. But this is something that we need to absolutely drive. And they understand analytics now. So they clearly understand the need for data. And what they're finding out is the supply chain has the data they need to do this. So you're the guy with the data. And once they find that out, they're going to be your best friend. And these other things are there as well too. The whole idea of supply chain risk and disruption is massive. Where we're located is massive. You just don't move locations willy-nilly. And the fact that the most important thing we have to do is service the customer. And if we don't do that, and that is done intuitively, it's done through supply chain. That's where that service comes from. So this guy or lady, this person will be your best friend. And if he's not your best friend, you need to go make him her that friend. We beat this up. This is from July 15, but I mean, basically, we've said it before. I should probably just take this slide out. But you can see it's a combination of these kinds of skill sets that we need in this industry to continue to push it forward. And I just came back from the annual conference for CSCMP, and I will tell you, there are people out there that are extremely impressive that are in this field now. Why is it so hard to do this? You might say, well, how come why? Well, because it challenges everything that a lot of companies are up against. So it's difficult to govern because in many cases you have a very pre-existing organizational structure and people don't want to move that around. And again, it's not an organization, it's a process. So you have to sell it as a process in order to make it work. Everybody you have to agree as a corporation on your strategy. You have to share a vision. What is that vision? What is it we want to do? And we translate that from a forecast into an execution plan. So we execute that based upon what is the vision of the company. So we convert that into operational instructions. We have to have people. So if I get back to if your organization is top heavy with folks that have been around for a long, long time, it's tough to change that paradigm when that happens. Most companies are not aligned. They have different incentives. Procurement has a different incentive than transportation does, than sales does. But in reality, to make this successful, and this is what makes it so hard, is it's very difficult to do that without leadership from the top that says, hey, there's a better way of doing it, and we all got to get together on the same page. I'll talk about that as well when we get to it, because I've actually been through one of those alignments, and the results were impressive. So I'm not going to read these. I'll let you read these on your own, but you can kind of see what this is all about. Here's some discussion on governance, about how it should be structured, and questions that you may want to ask. I think the overarching question's right here, and that is, how do companies make decisions? And so this kind of starts to bring out some. You can see here, it depends on your organization. Are you centralized, decentralized? Are you a hybrid of all that? Are you matrixed? How do you do that? And what's the best way of doing it? And they're telling you what they think it is, but it differs by company. So this is really more of a discussion topic. Same on strategy. When moving supply chains are, as you saw on that graphic, are extremely complex. So making all this come together and work is a very difficult job, and understanding how supply chain drives metrics like margin and growth and return on invested capital and return on investment and inventories and margins. You really have to build this map. You've got to build a map that says this is how we do it. And we're not going to do this in this course, but there's some compelling evidence to build a strategy based around risk management. That is, understand where every one of your network points are, and try to assign a risk factor to every one of those so that you know where you need to go. Here's shared vision. Again, this is the same situation. Is that if you're looking out over what time frame are you looking at when you're making these decisions? So again, a graphic that kind of describes what gets done where, depending upon where you are on your timeline. If you don't have leaders, you're not going to get there. So that's a talent side. Okay, and you can kind of see what this is, and you can see that when they say it's difficult, why can't that be you? I mean, why can't you be that manufacturing planner or that network planning analyst or whatever it is? If these are difficult, then you bring that skill set, and that's what this is telling us. And alignment is just that. I mean, it's all about making sure that everybody is sharing the same metrics and sharing the same incentives more than the metrics. And then the return on investment. So again, the projects that we put together, now your finance guy is going to tell you ROI is less than a year. And so these projects, supply chain projects, meet that threshold. So they should be given a high priority within the capital budgeting exercise, because projects in supply chain do have a very high ROI. And that's it for that. So we'll come back with the last